The stillness of the interrogation room had always been Agent David Miller's stage, a sterile canvas where the rawest human emotions were laid bare. He'd seen hardened criminals dissolve into tears, unrepentant killers confess their darkest deeds, all under the unwavering gaze of his analytical mind. But nothing, absolutely nothing, in his 2 decades of FBI service could have prepared him for the chilling, almost whispers-only account he'd later give. An encounter so profound it broke the very bedrock of his composure. This wasn't about extracting a confession. It was about receiving a revelation, a truth uttered not by a man, but by a cryptid, a creature of myth, whose words about an impending war would shatter his understanding of reality. Agent David Miller was a legend within the Bureau, a man whose name was synonymous with extracting truth from the most recalcitrant of suspects. His reputation preceded him, a quiet hum of respect bordering on fear. Known for his unwavering calm, his eyes, often described as chips of ice, could bore into a soul and meticulously dismantle its defenses. He was a master of psychological warfare, a chess player of human intent, always 3 moves ahead of his opponent. Yet, beneath the formidable exterior, lay a fierce, almost dogmatic skepticism. Logic was his compass, reason his North Star. He dealt in facts and evidence in the tangible world. Ghosts, aliens, cryptids. These were the fanciful playground of the credulous, not the serious business of law enforcement. David Miller was the ultimate pragmatist, a man who believed only in what he could see, touch, and meticulously document. His current assignment, however, was testing the limits of even his staunch rationalism. He found himself deep within the remote, densely forested expanse of the Pacific Northwest, a region shrouded in mist and ancient trees that seemed to swallow sunlight whole. This wasn't some high-profile urban case. This was a landscape of whispers and shadows, a place where civilization felt like a distant, flickering memory. The local authorities, a small, harried contingent of sheriffs and rangers, were clearly out of their depth. The area had been plagued by a disturbing string of unexplained disappearances, each case more baffling than the last. Hikers vanished without a trace, hunters disappeared from well-marked trails, and even a small research team had simply ceased all communication. Accompanying these unsettling disappearances were reports of strange, guttural sounds echoing through the valleys at night, and fleeting glimpses of something impossibly large moving through the dense undergrowth. The media, thankfully, had been kept at bay, but the local populace was riddled with a pervasive, creeping fear, a collective unease that vibrated just beneath the surface of their daily lives. This atmosphere of quiet dread had finally reached the ears of the FBI, prompting a covert investigation, with Miller at its helm. The initial anomaly that truly piqued Miller's seasoned interest, despite his inherent skepticism, was found at the site of the most recent disappearance. It wasn't just the lack of human evidence that was unsettling, but the presence of something entirely alien. Cryptic symbols, carved with an unnatural precision into ancient trees, surrounded the abandoned campsite. They were unlike anything Miller had ever encountered in his extensive experience with cults or indigenous markings. More disturbing still were the tracks. Massive, bipedal, and undeniably non-human, they were pressed deep into the muddy earth, defying any known zoological classification. Local authorities, desperate and bewildered, had dismissed them as elaborate hoaxes or the work of an unusually large bear. Miller, however, knew better. Bears don't carve symbols, And these tracks possessed an anatomical structure that suggested something far more complex than any conventional wildlife. They were too perfect, too deliberate, too intelligent. Miller had initially approached the case with his usual detached professionalism, seeing it as just another mundane missing persons investigation, albeit one with unusually elaborate red herrings. He fully expected to uncover a sophisticated criminal operation, perhaps a clandestine drug cartel or a survivalist cult. His analytical mind began constructing elaborate scenarios, mapping out potential motives and methodologies. Yet, with each passing day in the suffocating silence of the ancient forest, a growing sense of unease began to challenge his strictly rational worldview. The symbols continued to appear at new disappearance sites, identical, enigmatic. The sheer scale and consistency of the tracks ruled out individual pranksters. The air itself seemed to hum with an unseen presence, a primal awareness that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. His internal compass, which had always pointed unerringly towards logic and reason, was beginning to spin wildly, caught in an eddy of the inexplicable. This wasn't just a case. This felt like an intrusion, a deliberate challenge to everything he understood about the natural order of the world. He was still Agent Miller, the unshakable interrogator, but a tiny, almost imperceptible crack was forming in the edifice of his skepticism. The wilderness was whispering secrets, and he, for the first time in his career, was beginning to listen. Before we delve deeper into this incredible tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join our community of truth seekers. The unsettling pattern in the disappearances continued to escalate, weaving a chilling tapestry across the Pacific Northwest. Each new report echoed the last. Hunters vanished from their campsites, hikers disappeared from marked trails, and even small groups of prospectors seemingly evaporated into thin air. Adding to the macabre repetition was the persistent, baffling detail of the cryptic symbols. These strange markings, almost like primitive pictograms, were found etched into trees near the last known whereabouts of the missing, or scrawled crudely on rocks. They weren't familiar, not belonging to any known indigenous language or cult iconography. Yet their appearance was undeniably deliberate, a silent signature of an unknown perpetrator. Local residents, already accustomed to the wilderness's unpredictable nature, grew increasingly terrified. Whispers of old tribal legends, long dismissed as folklore, resurfaced with haunting insistence. The name Sasquatch, or Bigfoot, was no longer just a children's campfire story. It became a guttural utterance of fear, a desperate attempt to name the unnameable force that preyed on their remote communities. The local sheriff, a stoic man who had seen his share of tragedy, admitted privately to Miller that he was out of his depth. This wasn't a human criminal. The scale and sheer inexplicability of the events defied every logical explanation in his playbook. Despite his rigid FBI training and a career built on dismantling the illogical with cold, hard facts, Agent Miller found himself increasingly unnerved. The usual analytical framework he applied to every case felt useless here, like trying to catch smoke with a net. His mind, usually a well-oiled machine of deduction, churned with an unfamiliar friction. Every piece of evidence, or rather, the lack of conventional evidence, chipped away at his steadfast skepticism. There were no ransom notes, no signs of struggle beyond a few dislodged branches, no vehicles left behind, just the chilling void of absence and those inexplicable symbols. The wilderness itself seemed to conspire against him, its vast, silent expanse holding its secrets close. He'd stare at the topographical maps late into the night, tracing contours that seemed to swallow people whole, feeling a prickling sensation of unease that had nothing to do with the night chill seeping into his bones. His usual methodical approach struggled to find purchase in this shifting, nebulous reality. Recognizing the extraordinary nature of the investigation, Miller knew he couldn't proceed with a conventional FBI team. He needed unconventional minds, people who thought outside the rigidly defined parameters of law enforcement. He assembled a small, discreet team, each member chosen for their unique perspective. First, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a cryptobotanist whose academic peers often dismissed her theories on undiscovered species as bordering on fringe science. Her reluctance was palpable, her academic reputation at stake, but Miller promised her unprecedented access to samples and data. He knew her meticulous attention to detail and her deep understanding of forest ecosystems would be invaluable. Then there was Sergeant Marcus Thorne, a former Special Forces tracker, whose uncanny ability to read the wilderness had saved countless lives in hostile territories. Thorne, a man of few words and piercing eyes, possessed an almost primal intuition for tracking, an instinct Miller instinctively trusted. He was the kind of man who could tell you what animal had passed by, how long ago, and what its mood was, just by looking at a broken twig. Their arrival in the densely forested region marked a shift in the investigation. They weren't looking for a human perpetrator anymore. They were hunting an enigma. And then, the first direct evidence materialized, shattering Miller's carefully constructed world of rational thought. Deep within a ravine, near where another hiker had vanished, Thorne pointed to a series of impressions in the damp soil. These weren't bear prints, not elk, not any known animal. They were unmistakably bipedal, massive, with a disproportionately wide foot and an impression of incredible weight. Miller, kneeling, measured them himself, his gloved fingers trembling slightly as he felt the undeniable depression. They were too large, too powerful, too human-like to be dismissed. Dr. Reed, carefully sifting through the undergrowth nearby, let out a sharp gasp. Clinging to a broken branch, caught amidst the sap, was a tuft of coarse, dark hair. It wasn't animal fur. It possessed a strange, almost human-like thickness. Yet it was far too robust and dark to be anything Miller had ever encountered. Reed meticulously bagged the sample, her face a mixture of scientific excitement and profound apprehension. "Agent Miller," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. This is unlike anything I've ever seen. The cellular structure, the follicular pattern. It doesn't match any known primate, any extant species." Miller stared at the evidence, a cold dread seeping into his bones. The impossible was no longer theoretical. It was tangible, undeniable. He was forced to confront the existence of an unknown presence, a living creature that defied classification. The psychological toll began to mount with brutal efficiency. Miller, a man renowned for his unshakable stoicism, found himself plagued by vivid, unsettling dreams. They were always of the forest, vast and ancient, filled with unseen eyes and the faint echo of guttural roars that resonated deep within his chest. During the day, a pervasive sense of being watched clung to him like the damp mountain fog. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through his system. He'd spin around, his hand instinctively going to his sidearm, only to find nothing there but the silent, indifferent trees. The rational part of his brain screamed for him to dismiss it, to attribute it to stress and sleep deprivation. But the primal part, the part that had been thoroughly shaken by the evidence, refused to be silenced. This case was pushing not just his professional boundaries, but his very emotional and psychological core, forcing him to question the very foundation of his reality. The wilderness was no longer just a backdrop. It was an intelligent, watchful entity, and he was merely a trespasser within its ancient domain. The elusive nature of their target only fueled Miller's determination. Utilizing cutting-edge thermal imaging technology, usually reserved for military operations in hostile territories, his team meticulously scanned the dense ancient forest. The heat signatures were sporadic, fleeting, and massive, indicating a creature of considerable size and agility. Coupled with sophisticated acoustic sensors, capable of isolating subtle ground vibrations and atmospheric disturbances, they began to paint a picture of an entity that moved with an almost supernatural stealth. The deep thrum of its powerful strides barely registered, yet the equipment, calibrated to an unprecedented sensitivity, picked up the residual energy. This advanced tracking system, a mosaic of overlapping technologies, led them deeper and deeper into uncharted territory, a forgotten corner of the Pacific Northwest that seemed to resist the very notion of human intrusion. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig was amplified and analyzed, parsed for any deviation from the natural rhythm of the forest. The team, initially comprised of skeptics, found themselves holding their breath, their eyes glued to the flickering screens, their hearts pounding in anticipation of the impossible. Their pursuit was marked by a series of increasingly close encounters that simultaneously terrified and exhilarated them. One evening, a massive shadow flickered across their thermal scope, too large, too swift to be any known animal. Then came the sounds, deep, guttural vocalizations that resonated through their very bones, unlike any primate or bear. These weren't mere roars, they were complex, almost melodic, suggesting a form of communication too intricate for a simple beast. A cryptobotanist on the team, Dr. Anya Sharma, a woman who usually found solace in the quiet contemplation of ancient flora, now found herself trembling, her scientific instruments picking up infrasonic frequencies that suggested a creature capable of manipulating sound in ways previously thought impossible. The former military tracker, Sergeant Rex Corbin, a man whose nerves of steel had been forged in combat zones, confessed to Miller that he had never felt such primal fear, nor such an overwhelming sense of being utterly outmatched in his natural element. The sheer power implied by the fleeting glimpses, the sheer intelligence hinted at by the complex vocalizations, ratcheted up the tension within the group to an unbearable degree. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every rustle a potential threat. For David Miller, the evidence was becoming irrefutable, undeniable. His carefully constructed scientific worldview, his bedrock of rational thought, was slowly but surely crumbling. His initial skepticism had dissolved, replaced by an urgent, almost desperate need to understand. He had always prided himself on his ability to analyze, to deduce, to find logical explanations for even the most convoluted human behaviors. But this was different. This wasn't human. His scientific mind, honed by years of rigorous training, grappled with the supernatural, the cryptid, the truly unknown. He found himself replaying the faint echoing calls, examining the impossibly large footprints, reviewing the blurred thermal images, searching for any shred of a conventional explanation, but finding none. The patterns were too consistent, the anomalies too significant. He was forced to abandon his skepticism, to acknowledge the existence of something beyond human understanding, something that had patiently eluded scientific discovery for centuries, lurking just at the edge of perception. His professional detachment was replaced by a profound curiosity, a consuming drive to uncover the truth, whatever form it might take. Driven by this desperate need for answers, Miller devised a plan that went against every conventional protocol. He decided they would attempt to capture the creature, not to harm it, but to study it, to finally look into the eyes of the unknown. His trap was a marvel of non-lethal engineering, a reinforced multi-layered net system deployed by compressed air cannons, triggered by an array of motion and heat sensors. The netting itself was woven from a revolutionary synthetic fiber, designed to withstand immense force without causing injury. It was an audacious, almost reckless plan, born from Miller's growing conviction that this entity held the key to the disappearances, and perhaps to a far greater mystery. The team, initially wary, was eventually swayed by Miller's unwavering conviction and the sheer audacity of the idea. They understood that this was their only chance to finally confront the enigma that had plagued the region. Under the shroud of a moonless night, the team meticulously deployed the intricate trap. The silence of the forest was absolute, broken only by the hushed whispers of Miller giving commands and the almost imperceptible whir of their monitoring equipment. They retreated to a concealed observation post, their hearts pounding a rhythm against the cold metal of their thermal scopes. The long, agonizing wait began, bathed in the eerie green glow of their monitors. Hours bled into one another, each minute stretching into an eternity. The forest remained still, a vast, breathing entity itself, holding its breath with them. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl made them jump. Miller watched the screens, his jaw set, his breathing shallow, every fiber of his being focused on the moment he had pursued relentlessly. The air grew colder, the darkness deeper, as the minutes crawled towards midnight, the hour they had chosen for their fateful encounter. The tension was palpable, a live wire humming in the absolute silence, as they waited for the creature to step into their carefully laid snare. Then, precisely at the stroke of midnight, a deafening clang shattered the profound stillness of the forest. The ground vibrated violently beneath them, sending a jolt through Miller's entire body. The meticulously placed sensors had detected a massive presence, triggering the compressed air cannons. A cacophony of snapping synthetic fibers and tearing underbrush erupted from the trap site, followed by a guttural, earth-shaking roar that echoed through the ancient trees, bouncing off the distant peaks and settling deep within their bones. It was a sound of immense power, of raw, untamed frustration, a primeval cry that spoke of strength and fury. The monitors in their observation post flickered wildly, the thermal signatures flaring into an angry red blob as the ensnared entity struggled valiantly against the unyielding netting. Branches cracked, small trees splintered, and the very air seemed to vibrate with the creature's desperate attempts to free itself. Miller, adrenaline coursing through his veins, snapped into action. "Go! Go! Go!" he commanded, his voice hoarse but firm. The team, a well-oiled machine despite their terror, moved with practiced efficiency. They cautiously approached the epicenter of the commotion, their powerful floodlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. And there it was, ensnared within the high tensile netting, struggling with a strength that defied belief, was the legendary Bigfoot. It was a towering figure, easily over 9 feet tall, covered in thick, dark brown fur that seemed to absorb the light. Its musculature was astonishing, rippling under the fur with each powerful heave. But it was not the sheer size or strength that captivated Miller. It was its face. Beneath the heavy brow ridge, 2 large, intelligent eyes burned with a mixture of fear, anger, and something else. A profound, ancient wisdom that seemed to pierce through the artificial light and directly into Miller's soul. This was no mindless beast, no primitive animal. This was an entity possessing a discernible level of awareness, an almost human-like intelligence etched into its features. The powerful jaw set in a grimace of frustration, not savage rage. Its hands, massive and dexterous, with long, powerful fingers, clutched at the netting, attempting to find a weakness. The sheer scale of the creature was breathtaking, dwarfing the surrounding foliage, a living myth brought into stark reality under the glare of their lights. It was a moment that rewrote every scientific textbook, shattered every preconceived notion, and validated every whispered legend. Despite the creature's immense power and clear distress, Miller felt a strange calm settle over him. He knew, with absolute certainty, that this was his chance. This creature held the answers. "Secure the perimeter," he ordered, his voice steady. "Maintain distance, but keep the lights focused. No sudden movements. Nobody fires unless explicitly ordered, and only in a life-threatening situation." He instructed his team to reinforce the netting, ensuring the creature was held securely, but without causing it further distress. He then stepped forward, alone, closer than any of his team dared, positioning himself just beyond the creature's reach. He knew the risks, but his interrogator's instinct was overriding everything else. He needed to talk to it, to understand. He began by speaking softly, his voice measured and calm, devoid of any aggression. "Hello," he said, the word feeling utterly inadequate in the face of such an ancient being. "My name is David Miller. We mean you no harm. We just want to understand." He tried various methods of communication, his mind racing through all the protocols he had ever learned. He tried simple gestures, slow, deliberate movements of his hands, attempting to convey peace and curiosity. He tried vocalizations, mimicking the sounds he had heard the creature make, hoping to connect on a primal level. He even closed his eyes for a moment, attempting to project a sense of calm and inquiry into the creature's mind, a desperate, almost telepathic plea for understanding, recalling anecdotal tales of indigenous shamans and their connection to nature. He delved into the deep well of his psychological training, recalling techniques used to establish rapport with hostile, uncommunicative subjects. But the Bigfoot remained silent. Its struggles gradually subsided, replaced by a tense stillness. Its gaze, however, never left Miller, those ancient eyes filled with an unsettling mixture of sorrow, resignation, and an intelligence that seemed to dwarf human comprehension. It was a gaze that spoke volumes without uttering a single sound. It conveyed a profound, almost cosmic weariness, as if it had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, seen the relentless march of time, and felt the weight of ages. There was no fear in its eyes now, only an almost heartbreaking sadness, a deep, pervasive melancholy that challenged every assumption Miller had ever held about intelligence and communication. It was clear that its silence was not born of ignorance or savagery, but of something far more profound, a deliberate withholding, a choice. It was an unnerving, unsettling experience, to be scrutinized by a being whose silence spoke with more eloquence than any human argument. Miller felt an inexplicable urge to apologize, though he wasn't sure why. A profound sense of having intruded upon something sacred and ancient. He stood there, alone in the blinding glare of the floodlights, completely exposed, completely vulnerable, yet utterly determined to bridge the chasm between their two worlds. The midnight forest held its breath, waiting. The silent vigil stretched on, each second a hammer blow against the collective nerves of the team. until finally, the forest floor beneath them shuddered. A guttural roar, primal and powerful, tore through the night, followed by the violent crash of timber. On the monitors, the thermal signature erupted into a furious chaos of red and orange, confirming the trap had been sprung. Miller's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum against the sudden, overwhelming noise. They rushed forward, flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness, to find the impossible made real. Ensnared within the high tensile netting, struggling with immense, desperate power, was the creature of myth. It was colossal, far larger than any ape, covered in dense dark fur, its muscular form straining against the resilient fibers. Its eyes, even in the chaotic thrashing, held an astonishing depth, a flicker of something ancient and intelligent. The initial shock gave way to a surge of adrenaline as Miller took charge. They carefully approached, keeping a safe distance, but close enough to witness the creature's sheer physical might. It was not a mindless beast. Its struggles were calculated, intelligent, testing the limits of its confinement. Miller, against the terrified protests of his team, insisted on an interrogation. He believed, with an almost irrational conviction, that this being, this Sasquatch, held the answers they sought. He directed his team to stabilize the netting, to ensure the creature was secure but not harmed. Then he stepped forward, alone. He began to speak, his voice low and steady, a practiced cadence honed over decades of extracting truth from reluctant subjects. He tried sign language, simple gestures, even vocalizations, mimicking the sounds they had recorded, desperately seeking a connection. The creature watched him with unblinking intensity, its heavy brow furrowed, its chest heaving. It remained silent, its gaze a profound, ancient stare that seemed to pierce through Miller's very soul, conveying a deep, unsettling sadness that challenged everything he understood about communication. Days blurred into a strange, unsettling rhythm within the confines of the temporary, reinforced enclosure they had constructed. Miller spent hours alone with the creature, employing every empathetic interrogation technique in his arsenal. He spoke of loss, of fear, of the shared burden of existence that all intelligent beings carried. He spoke not as a captor, but as an empath, seeking common ground in the vast chasm separating their species. He recounted his own moments of profound sorrow, his doubts, his very human fears. He poured out his soul, an offering in the hope of eliciting a response. The creature listened, its powerful chest rising and falling rhythmically, its deep-set eyes never leaving Miller's face. The team watched from a distance, bewildered and uneasy, convinced Miller had lost his mind. Then, on the third night, as the moon cast long, skeletal shadows through the dense forest, it happened. Miller was speaking, his voice hoarse, about the universal ache of loneliness, when a faint, guttural sound escaped the creature's throat. It was not a roar, nor a growl, but something akin to a sigh, heavy with untold millennia. And then, a voice, clear as a mountain spring, yet resonating with the weight of ancient stone, filled Miller's mind. It wasn't spoken words, but a direct transfer of thoughts, emotions, and images, a telepathic torrent that bypassed the need for language. The voice, simultaneously masculine and feminine, ancient and immediate, revealed its lineage, its species' long and unbroken presence on Earth, stretching back to a time before humanity had even conceived of fire. It was a revelation that shattered Miller's understanding of natural history, of evolution, of reality itself. The creature's voice explained the disappearances, the missing individuals it revealed, were not harmed, but relocated. They were those who had inadvertently stumbled upon ancient, sacred sites, places of power and delicate balance, maintained by its kind for countless ages. The Sasquatch, a guardian of these hidden truths, was protecting humanity from its own destructive tendencies, from unearthing what should remain buried. Humanity, with its insatiable curiosity and relentless expansion, was constantly on the precipice of disturbing forces best left undisturbed, forces that would unleash unforeseen consequences upon the world. The Sasquatch, it conveyed, acted out of a profound, albeit reluctant, duty to prevent these catastrophes. They were not malevolent, but protectors, intervening when human ignorance threatened to unravel the delicate tapestry of existence. Then came the chilling prophecy. The creature revealed an impending global conflict, not a war of human nations clashing with steel and fire, but a deeper, more existential struggle. It was a consequence of humanity's continuous disregard for the planet, for the interconnectedness of all life, and for the hidden truths that sustained their world. The war, it projected with an eerie certainty, was against forces humanity was inadvertently awakening, forces that would bring unimaginable devastation. It spoke of a shift, a cosmic imbalance catalyzed by human hubris, a reckoning that was not yet inevitable, but terrifyingly close. This wasn't a warning, it was a desperate plea, a telepathic scream from a species burdened with ancient knowledge. The sheer weight of this revelation, a hidden, ancient intelligence predicting humanity's downfall, not through external invasion but internal decay, shook Miller to his core. His carefully constructed worldview, built on logic and scientific understanding, crumbled around him, leaving him adrift in a sea of terrifying, profound truth. The silence that followed the transfer of thoughts was deafening, filled with the echoes of a wisdom so vast it threatened to consume him. The creature, its ancient wisdom now flowing directly into Miller's mind, began to elaborate on the nature of the impending war it had earlier cryptically alluded to. This was no conventional conflict of nations or ideologies, no clash of human armies over resources or beliefs. Instead, Bigfoot conveyed a terrifying vision of an unseen, encroaching force, a malevolent presence stirring in the deep recesses of the earth, roused by humanity's relentless assault on the planet. It spoke of vibrational imbalances, of ancient seals weakened by pollution and deforestation, of energetic pathways disrupted by constant construction, and the ceaseless hum of technology. This war, it explained, would be a battle for the very soul of the planet, a cosmic struggle against entities that predated human consciousness, beings drawn to the chaos and disharmony humanity so carelessly sowed. The missing individuals, Bigfoot reiterated with a profound sadness, had simply stumbled too close to these weakened points, becoming unwitting conduits, or perhaps even lures, for forces best left undisturbed. They were not evil, but merely a necessary sacrifice to prevent a greater catastrophe, a desperate attempt to reset the balance. Bigfoot then revealed the ancient pact, the solemn vow its species had undertaken millennia ago. They were not merely animals, nor were they solitary wanderers. They were guardians, descendants of a primal intelligence, tasked with protecting the fragile equilibrium of the earth, acting as silent wardens against the very forces now threatening to awaken. Their existence, their clandestine presence in the untouched wilderness, was a deliberate act of stewardship, a living barrier against the encroaching darkness. They shielded humanity, not from itself entirely, but from the consequences of its ignorance, from the cosmic repercussions of its relentless destruction. They had observed the rise and fall of civilizations, witnessed the hubris of countless generations, always hoping that one day humanity would learn, would finally understand its interconnectedness with all life, with the very fabric of existence. But that day, Bigfoot's thoughts projected with sorrow had yet to come, and time was rapidly running out. The sheer magnitude of this information, the weight of such an ancient cosmic burden, coupled with the creature's profound sorrow and unwavering wisdom, proved to be the breaking point for Miller. His legendary composure, the unyielding facade that had seen him through countless harrowing interrogations, finally shattered. Tears, hot and unbidden, streamed down his face, carving paths through the grime and sweat that had accumulated over the long, tense night. They were tears born of fear, a primal terror at the cosmic scale of the threat. They were tears of awe, witnessing a truth so immense, so ancient that it dwarfed every human endeavor. And they were tears of despair, a crushing sense of hopelessness for a species, his own, so oblivious to the precipice upon which it stood. This was not just a threat to a city or a nation. This was an existential crisis for all life, triggered by humanity's unwitting hand. The creature's wisdom resonated with a truth that transcended language, a feeling of deep, profound weariness, the burden of ages spent watching, waiting, protecting, and now, finally, despairing. Miller found himself grappling with an impossible ethical dilemma. He was an FBI agent, sworn to uphold the law and protect the public. The information he now possessed would shatter global paradigms, redefine history, science, and religion. Releasing these findings would undoubtedly cause widespread panic, chaos, and societal collapse as humanity struggled to comprehend its true place in a universe far more complex and dangerous than previously imagined. Yet, keeping silent meant potentially dooming humanity, allowing it to blindly stumble towards the very catastrophe Bigfoot warned against. The weight of this choice bore down on him, heavier than any case file, any criminal, any national security threat he had ever encountered. He was a single man, entrusted with a secret that could either ignite a global awakening or preserve a fragile, blissful ignorance. Which path was truly the lesser evil? Which choice offered even a glimmer of hope? Bigfoot, sensing Miller's internal turmoil, extended its mental connection, its plea growing more urgent, more resonant. It implored Miller to understand the intricate, delicate interconnectedness of all life. It showed him visions of vast, unseen energy networks beneath the earth, of ancient ley lines vibrating with cosmic power, of the intricate dance between flora and fauna, between atmosphere and ocean, all part of a single, living organism. It emphasized that humanity was not separate from the system, but an integral, yet often destructive part of it. The creature's thoughts painted a vivid picture of a world where every action, every thought rippled through the fabric of existence, affecting not just the immediate environment, but the unseen forces that governed reality itself. Its plea was simple, yet profound. Humanity must change its destructive path. It must rediscover reverence for the earth, for the hidden wisdom of nature, before it unwittingly unleashed forces it could neither comprehend nor control. The war was not inevitable, but a consequence, a reaction to humanity's ongoing neglect. There was still a chance, Bigfoot conveyed, a slender thread of hope, if humanity could only learn to listen, to respect, to reconnect with the ancient heartbeat of the planet. The weight of Bigfoot's words, The crushing reality of an impending global catastrophe born from humanity's own hands solidified Miller's decision. He looked into those ancient, sorrowful eyes, brimming with a wisdom that spanned millennia, and knew he could not hold this formidable, sentient being captive. To do so would be to betray not just Bigfoot, but the very essence of the plea it had just imparted. Despite the unimaginable implications for his career, for the FBI, for the world, Miller understood that some truths were too vast, too sacred to be contained by human institutions. With a heavy sigh that felt as though it released years of pent-up skepticism and rigid adherence to protocol, he gave the command for the restraints to be deactivated, for the cage to be opened. He watched as the massive creature, with a grace that belied its immense size, slowly rose. There was a moment, a profound, silent exchange of understanding between man and cryptid, before Bigfoot turned and melted back into the dense, forgiving embrace of the forest from which it had reluctantly emerged. The air, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, seemed to hum with the lingering resonance of its presence, a silent testament to the impossible truth that had just transpired. Miller's team, still reeling from the fragmented, overwhelming waves of emotion and thought that had emanated from the creature during its communication with their leader, exchanged bewildered and terrified glances. They had witnessed Miller's transformation, seen the hardened agent reduced to tears, heard the guttural, unearthly sounds that had preceded the telepathic connection, and felt the sheer, ancient power of the entity. They hadn't fully grasped the specific details of the warning, the nuances of the coming war, or the ancient pact of guardianship. But the raw, visceral impact of the experience was undeniable. Their worldviews, once comfortably anchored in the measurable and the explainable, had been irrevocably shattered. The cryptobotanist, usually so composed in her scientific observations, looked pale and shaken, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. The former military tracker, renowned for his stoicism, nervously clutched his rifle, his knuckles white, a silent prayer perhaps forming on his lips. They were left to grapple with an impossible truth, a reality so far beyond their comprehension that it left them speechless, their minds struggling to reconcile what they had just experienced with everything they thought they knew. They collected the equipment in a stunned, almost robotic silence, their movements slow and uncertain, each step taking them further from the site of the encounter, but never away from its indelible mark on their souls. Returning to civilization, Agent Miller was no longer the man he had been. The meticulous, logical interrogator, the unflappable agent known for his unyielding resolve, was gone. In his place was a man haunted, not by fear, but by an unbearable burden of knowledge and the creature's prophetic words. His once solid worldview, built on empirical evidence and rational thought, lay permanently fractured, replaced by a terrifying understanding of unseen forces and ancient truths. Sleep offered no solace. His nights were filled with vivid, prophetic dreams, echoes of Bigfoot's mental transmissions, visions of a world teetering on the brink, and the silent, pleading gaze of the forest guardian. Each sunrise brought not renewal, but a fresh weight of responsibility, a gnawing awareness of the humanity's precarious position. He found himself walking through mundane daily routines as if in a dream, the banality of human concerns seeming trivial against the backdrop of cosmic threats. Every laugh, every argument, every headline struck him with a profound sense of tragic irony, knowing what lay beneath the thin veneer of human civilization. Back at headquarters, Miller meticulously penned a highly classified report, an internal document that he knew, with chilling certainty, would be buried deep within the FBI's most obscure archives. He detailed the unexplainable symbols, the irrefutable evidence of a non-human entity, and the telepathic communication. He transcribed, as best he could, the creature's warning about the impending war and its ancient role as a guardian. He knew it would be dismissed as a delusion, a breakdown, perhaps even a fabrication. No one would believe him, and to push it further would only lead to his professional ruin and the creature's inevitable exploitation or destruction. Yet, he felt an unshakable compulsion to record the truth, to commit Bigfoot's message to paper, however futile it might seem. Perhaps, he thought, one day, far in the future, someone, some open-minded analyst or historian, might stumble upon it, and the seeds of the truth might finally take root. It was a message to the future, a whisper into the void, a desperate hope that humanity might eventually listen. From that day forward, Miller dedicated his life to a new, quiet purpose. He remained an FBI agent, but his focus subtly shifted. He began to advocate, in quiet, unassuming ways, for environmental protection, for sustainable practices, for a deeper understanding of indigenous cultures and their reverence for the land. He became a silent guardian himself, working within the system to subtly guide humanity toward a more sustainable and conscious future. He funded ecological research discreetly, anonymously contributed to land preservation efforts, and even in his spare time, devoured ancient texts and neglected folklore, searching for echoes of the wisdom Bigfoot had shared. He sought to connect humanity's fractured understanding of itself with the ancient, interconnected web of life, understanding that the true battle was not against an external enemy, but within humanity's own heart and mind. His actions were rarely seen, never acknowledged, but driven by an unwavering conviction born from that midnight encounter. He carried the burden of the secret with a quiet resolve, forever changed, forever bound to the ancient guardian of the forest, a man living two lives, one of routine, the other of profound, silent mission. The immediate confrontation with the creature, the terror of the disappearances, and the frantic search had all finally reached their resolution. Bigfoot, with its ancient wisdom and solemn pronouncements, had returned to the shadows, melting back into the primeval forest as silently as it had appeared. The forest, once a place of unsettling mystery, now held a new, deeper significance for Miller, a place where the veil between worlds had thinned, revealing truths far grander and more terrifying than he could have ever imagined. The missing individuals, carefully relocated by the creature as a protective measure, eventually resurfaced, disoriented but unharmed, their tales of wandering, lost in a mystical fog, quickly dismissed by conventional authorities as temporary psychosis induced by extreme stress. The official FBI report, meticulously crafted by Miller, spoke of an elaborate hoax, or a series of unrelated incidents, a narrative carefully constructed to satisfy bureaucratic demands and maintain public order. The true story, the one imprinted on his soul, remained locked away, a secret too profound and dangerous to articulate. But while the immediate crisis had passed, the larger, existential conflict of humanity's future, as foretold by the ancient guardian, remained a chilling, ever-present weight on Miller's conscience. He lived with the heavy burden of the secret, the knowledge of an impending global reckoning that transcended conventional warfare. Every news report of escalating geopolitical tensions, every scientific discovery hinting at unforeseen cosmic phenomena, every environmental crisis that ravaged the planet, served as a grim reminder of Bigfoot's prophecy. He constantly wondered when and how this war, not of human design but a consequence of human folly, would unfold. Would it be a sudden, cataclysmic event, or a slow, insidious unraveling? A gradual decay of the delicate balance the creature had so desperately tried to protect. The uncertainty was a constant companion, a phantom whisper in the quiet moments of his life. The world continued its relentless churn, oblivious to the profound wisdom hidden in its ancient places, deaf to the warnings whispered by its oldest inhabitants. Miller, however, was forever changed. His once unshakable logical framework had been irrevocably shattered, replaced by a profound understanding of interconnectedness, of forces unseen, of a reality far more expansive and intricate than mainstream science dared to acknowledge. He left the FBI, his once promising career now feeling hollow and meaningless in the face of what he knew. The sterile confines of bureaucratic operations could no longer contain his expanded consciousness. He found a new, profound purpose in his life, driven by the creature's wisdom, a quiet dedication to subtly influencing humanity towards a more sustainable and conscious path. He used his impeccable analytical skills, not for chasing criminals, but for identifying patterns of environmental degradation, societal division, and the alarming erosion of spiritual connection to the earth. He became an advocate, not openly, but through carefully curated speeches at obscure conferences, through anonymous financial contributions to ecological initiatives, and through mentorship of young minds open to unconventional thought. He wrote articles under pseudonyms, weaving ancient wisdom with modern scientific findings, planting seeds of awareness, hoping they would germinate in fertile minds. He traveled extensively, not as an agent, but as a silent observer, seeking out other guardians, other whispers of the ancient world, finding solace and confirmation in communities that still honored the old ways. He dedicated himself to understanding and subtly guiding humanity toward a future where the planet's pulse was respected, its sacred sites protected, and its hidden knowledge revered. He became a silent guardian himself, a human echo of the majestic creature he had once interrogated in a moonlit forest, forever changed by his midnight encounter. His own life became a testament to the message of hope in the face of despair that Bigfoot had conveyed. He understood that while the path was fraught with peril, humanity was not entirely lost. There was still a chance, still a flicker of possibility for redemption, if only enough people would choose to listen to the whispers of the ancient world, to heed the warnings of the earth, and to reconnect with the profound, intricate web of life that sustained them all. He lived quietly, his countenance now marked by a deep serenity, mixed with a knowing sorrow, a man who had seen beyond the veil and chosen to carry the truth, not as a burden, but as a sacred trust. The world might never know the true story of Agent David Miller and the midnight interrogation, but his actions, inspired by the voice from the shadows, continued to ripple outward, a quiet force working towards a future where humanity might, just might, avert the war that threatened to consume it all. What do you think happened to Agent Miller after this incredible encounter? Do you believe humanity can truly avert the cosmic conflict Bigfoot warned about? Or are we inevitably hurtling towards a fate of our own making? Let us know in the comments below. Share your theories, your hopes, and your fears. And if you don't want to miss our next deep dive into the unknown, if you crave more mind-bending stories that challenge your perceptions of reality, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more tales from the edge of human understanding. Your engagement, helps us bring these extraordinary narratives to light.